Good evening from New York. I'm David Schuster. Keith Olbermann is off tonight. In November of 1944, the Nazi government set up a work camp in Ohrdruf, Germany, a satellite camp of Buchenwald, forcing prisoners to dig a bunker for Adolf Hitler. In April of 1945, Private Charlie Payne arrived at Ohrdruf with the 89th Infantry Division, the first time the U.S. Army set foot in a German concentration camp. In June of 2008, in our fifth story tonight, Private Payne's great-nephew returned to Buchenwald today. President Obama became the first U.S. president to visit the Holocaust Memorial at Buchenwald. He was accompanied by German Prime Minister Angela Merkel and Nobel Peace Prize winner Elie Wiesel, a Buchenwald survivor. Today's visit was something of a bookend to yesterday's milestone Mideast peace speech in Cairo. Mr. Obama announced that U.S. envoy George Mitchell will head to the Mideast next week in a bid to restart peace talks there. His German trip also included a 2-hour tour of the U.S. military hospital at Landstuhl, where he met with U.S. service members being treated for wounds suffered in Afghanistan and Iraq. But it is also a personal trip for the president. His grandfather helped prepare U.S. troops for the Normandy landing and joined them weeks later. Mr. Obama tomorrow will be taking part in 65th anniversary commemorations at Normandy along with his great-uncle, Charles Payne, who never made it more than 300 feet inside the Ohrdruf Nazi camp back in April of '44, and was so horrified by what he saw, he spent 6 months in isolation when he returned home. General Eisenhower arriving a week after Private Payne filmed what the U.S. found there because he wanted the whole world to see it. Today, President Obama recalled Private Payne's trauma when he was asked about Iran's president, who has questioned whether the Holocaust really happened.
He should make his own visit. I was very explicit yesterday. I have no patience for people who would deny history. My great-uncle, my grandmother's brother, was part of the unit that first liberated Buchenwald. He could not absorb that people would do that to each other. And so going back to the president of Iran, to make light of that, to deny it, is to create the potential of repeating that kind of horror.
Joining us tonight is MSNBC political analyst Richard Wolff, author of the new book, Renegade, The Making of a President. And Richard, good evening.
Good evening, David.
Richard, was I right in calling today sort of a bookend to yesterday's speech? And if so, what does the book itself say?
Well, it is a sort of bookend in the sense that on the one side, as you reach out, as President Obama reaches out to the Middle East, there is a feeling that it has to be balanced. This is a very finely calibrated set of diplomatic maneuvers he's executing here. And, of course, there's nothing more important in terms of Israel's collective memory or, in fact, their fears moving forward than the Holocaust. It's also actually a piece of fine calibration for European politics. The president is now in France, and, you have to balance France and Germany. You have to balance Israel and Arab countries. And this is a very delicate maneuver that is also, of course, wrapped up with Normandy and the commemoration there. It's important to recognize culture and history because in Europe and the Middle East, it's not just what's past is prologue. The past is still very present, and people feel the passions, the insecurities, the pain of recent history very much today.
Richard, what's the reaction to this trip so far on the home front? And are we now talking about 10-foot pole material for the Republican Party?
Well, at this stage, yes. Anything to do with the Second World War is very hard for anyone to question. I do think it's curious about the comments to do with the speech yesterday. I mean, the idea that it's un-American to try and restore America's place in the world or stand up for American values by trying to win some new friends in a hostile region, it just kind of beggars belief. I mean, there was a time, not so long ago, when America was very forward-leaning in trying to find friends on the other side of the Iron Curtain. Nobody suggested that you should try and alienate everyone in East Germany. It was regular people in East Germany that toppled the Berlin Wall. It wasn't government-to-government contact, and it wasn't foreign tanks.
With all due respect to former Senator Mitchell, but he's been to this rodeo before, so regardless of yesterday's speech, don't we have to question whether repeating past efforts will actually yield new results?
Well, that's a good question, but Mitchell's real expertise, his real breakthrough was the Northern Ireland Peace Accord, and you have to remember how intractable that was. People thought that Catholics and Protestants would never reconcile. It was violence, unending violence as far as the eye could see, and it ended because there was a concerted effort from the get-go by people like George Mitchell. That's the kind of effort that needs to be applied to the Middle East. It's shuttle diplomacy. It has to begin early in a presidency. I think time is more important than the characters involved, and Mitchell's experience actually will probably be useful.
We've got Doug Brinkley standing by to field this question, so no pressure, but what is your sense of the intended political meaning behind Mr. Obama's visit to Buchenwald and commemorating D-Day tomorrow?
Well, I couldn't possibly compete with Doug Brinkley, but let me just say that you cannot forget, as the generation that went through the Second World War gets older and passes away, we should never forget what a tremendous achievement, what tremendous suffering was represented by that war. And actually, as archives open up, and maybe Brinkley can speak to this, as archives open up, we learn more and more about it all the time. It isn't actually a dead piece of the history books, and it's very important to have a president who can speak and feel that history vividly today.
MSNBC political analyst Richard Wolff. The new book is Renegade, The Making of a President. Richard, thanks as always for your time.
Thank you, David.